Continuing our Best of 2024 series, today we're looking at Ash of Wars, those delicious weapon arts you can put onto your weapons. If you don't want to use unique weapons, then there are some incredible weapon skills you can add to the generic weapons in the game that are absolutely better, especially now that almost all the unique weapon counterparts have been nerfed. I'm looking at you, Rivers of Blood. Let's go. Let me know your favorite Ash of War in the comments down below. I won't be covering any of the unique skills or like the unique weapons. I did put out a video for the best weapons in 2024. If you're looking for something like that, go and watch that video. I'll link that here. But let's start with the Golden Vow. Now, this grants yourself and nearby allies an increased attack power and defense for like 45 seconds. It's about 11% attack damage, and your damage negation is about 8%, I believe. And what makes this really good is that you can grab a dagger, which weighs like virtually nothing. You can stick this on that dagger, and now you have got Golden Vow on literally any build that you want. Now, I wouldn't be using this as like your main Ash of War on your main weapon, right? Because it just doesn't really do anything in the actual combat encounter. There's like not really any point to doing that, but you can stick it on a dagger and profit. Like any sort of a build, right? You know, obviously there's the Golden Vow incantation version, and if you're not running a faith build, you can't really use that. Say, for example, if you're running an intelligence build, you lack any of those buffs, and by putting Golden Vow on a dagger and then just having it like in your second weapon slot, you can switch to this at the start of an encounter, pop this for the extra damage and damage negation, switch back to your staff, whatever your main weapon is, and then just profit, right? There's no downside to doing this, and it can give you a little bit of that edge in some of those tougher encounters, which you're definitely going to experience in the DLC. In order to get this, you can get it pretty early in the game in Limgrave via a mounted Godric Knight that is located on this cliff just above the death-touched catacombs, and upon defeating him, you'll get the Ash of War Golden Vow. Cragblade is next. Now, this one has had some significant buffs since launch that actually made it a feasible weapon art. Now, this is fantastic for any strength builds or maybe dexterity builds that aren't really using any faith or your intelligence, that sort of thing, because it is a very specific like buff for something like that. So what Cragblade does, now that it has been through its significant amount of buffs, in patch 1.07, it lasts 60 seconds now. It increases your attack power by about 15%, your stamina attack power as well, and your stance damage buff as well. So you have a significant chance to break an enemy's poise by using Cragblade. Now, the stance damage was nerfed in patch 1.8 to bring it back down to 10%. It was originally 20, but it's still an incredible buff for those like strength builds and setups, right? Because you put this on a heavy weapon that already has a high amount of like poise and stagger damage, what have you. Not only are you getting the extra attack power benefit from it, you're also increasing the amount of poise damage you can do. You can very quickly break enemy stances with this, right? I actually made a build specifically using Cragblade because of how valuable it is in the game right now. If you want to go watch that build video, I will link that here as well, which I do highly recommend for any strength users if you want a different type of strength build, which is a lot of the footage you're seeing here is how to put that together. To get Cragblade, it's actually quite missable just before the Great Bridge in Caelid, where you're at the impassable Great Bridge site of Grace. There is a scarab near here that you can destroy that will get you the Ash of War Cragblade. Waves of Darkness plunges the armament into the ground to release 3 waves of, you guessed it, darkness, and you can follow up here as well to attack with the sword in a sweeping strike. Now, this one is a solid gravity Ash of War. There's a few of these, but I decided to pick this one because it's a little bit unique. It's also harder to get. You may not have come across it, and it has those 3 wave effects that are really interesting because they're sort of staggered, right? Like you'll be out of the animation of the Ash of War of doing it, and that 3rd wave, like darkness effect, will trigger. So you can sort of use this and then follow up with your attack while the waves are still triggering. It also does really solid damage, especially in like scenarios where you're being attacked by multiple enemies or something like that. And because it is sort of an intelligence gravity focus, right, you can add, say, you know, the cold effect to it like I have in this setup where I'm using that massive Guts Greatsword and I've put the cold effect on it, so I'm getting frostbite build up as well for like just my standard attacks for this sort of build setup. And it's a really valuable idea to put on something like this for a build like that. And in order to get this, you will need to trade in the Remembrance of the Natural Born to Enya at the Round Table Hold. This is the boss at the end of Lake of Rot, Astral the Natural Born Dragonborn of the Void. You will need to go all the way through the Lake of Rot in the underground sections of the game in order to defeat this boss and to grab the Wave of Darkness. Flaming Strike is one of my favorite Ash of Wars. I'm actually using this in my current playthrough, and this was buffed pretty substantially in one of the recent patches, and it's just like great across the board. Now, as its basic like attack, you do this like nice AoE like fire puff out of smoke, right? If you follow up with a heavy attack, you'll then not only do damage with that, you'll add fire to your weapon, so you're getting additional fire damage on top of what you're already doing with that weapon. Now, in patch 1.07, the duration of this was increased from 20 to 40 seconds, and the attack power that the weapon, like the fire attribute that it gains, was actually increased as well from 65 to 90, and the recovery time and the hitbox and stuff has been cleaned up in one of the other patches as well. But this is just a fantastic Ash of War, right? Like, you can put the flame art version on this if you're using a faith build, which is what I have done here for my build. That's sort of a dragon-ish priest thing that's using Flaming Strike like on my Flameberg weapon as a greatsword. I'm just really a fan of the flow of Flaming Strike. Like, I've used it in other builds as well with like the Nagakiba and like other setups. It's really valuable to have because fire damage is pretty consistent as a good damage type across the board throughout the game, other than obviously the fire giant. And you know, you can deal a fair amount of damage with this, and it's also a great Ash of War to tinker with like, say, if you're just doing flame or flame art to add fade. Seppuku is next. Now, this adds a flat physical attack power bonus to your weapon, as well as increasing the amount of bleed buildup that the weapon does as well. So bleed buildup is one of the most common types of like procs that you will have in Elden Ring. Not only is it the most common, it's also one of the easiest to buff on top of that, right? You can get a damage increase from the Lord of Blood's Exaltation talisman that you can equip, as well as from the White Mask helm that you can equip to get a further damage increase. So not only do you get a damage increase from Seppuku itself by triggering this effect on yourself, you also get benefits because there is bleed in the area from both the talisman and the helm. And in patch 1.07, it did get a bit of a nerf to its overall bleed buildup, as well as the amount of damage it does to yourself, but it is still quite a good Ash of War, especially to put on like a second weapon. Say, for example, if you're running like a dual katana build or something like that, put this on your second weapon, you can switch to it, seppuku yourself to get those damage buffs and everything, and then switch back to like dual wielding and use like something else, like say double slash, which we're going to return to a little bit later in this video. But you know, you've got those options there to gain yourself an extra amount of damage, as well as triggering blood loss very easy for the additional damage effects you can get from having that effect triggered in the area. The Ash of War Seppuku comes from the frozen lake area up at the top mountaintops of the giants. Near the freezing lake side of Grace, there is an invisible scarab here that you'll need to defeat. Once you've done that, you'll have the Ash of War for yourself. Braggart's Roar is next. Now, there are a ton of Ash of Wars in the game that are fit in this like raw category. I wanted to call out one of them here, but you can sort of use any of them because they're all very similar. But I decided to go with Braggart's Roar here because in patch 1.07, funnily enough, how that keeps coming up in these videos, it did actually get a buff. Now, its duration was increased from 30 to 60 seconds. The physical attack power has been increased from 7.5 to 10. Also, the amount of negation it does was increased to 10%, and the stamina recovery was also improved as well. So I wanted to call this out because it's significantly better now than it was at launch, and it is obviously affected by the Raw Medallion, which is the talisman that improves the effects of any of the raw Ash of Wars or effects in the game, right? Now, this is a fantastic option for any quality, strength build, dex build, what have you. You can put this on a second weapon, you can put this on your main weapon. It does change the R2 animation to be a different animation, same as like a lot of the raw that the Ash of Wars, they do sort of do that to change the R2. So while it is a buff, like a lot of the other buffs that you may not actually use on your main weapon, it does have that secondary effect of it changing your R2, but it is a substantial buff that you can get, and I would highly recommend using one of these in one of your strength builds or something like that for extra buffs. This is found by Blackguard Big Boggarts. You'll need to defeat him in order to gain this. Now, it's actually on his Iron Ball weapon. You can either find him like anywhere throughout his quest line, whether it's right at the start of Learning the Lakes or what have you, and if you actually do complete the Dung Eaters quest line, you'll get this at the end as like an alternative as well. Lion's Claw is one of the best poise damage Ash of Wars in the game. As you somersault forward and slam your weapon into the foe, you'll deal a significant amount of physical damage as well as stance damage and break their stances pretty easily. In patch 1.04, this did get a little buff to increase the cast time and decrease the recovery time, so it's much of a smoother animation to use now. There's not heaps to say here, like any strength build or build that's using a massive colossal weapon or something like that. Lion's Claw is fantastic because it's a fast animation that smacks the enemy in the face with this weapon. Very commonly will break their stance to follow up with critical hits, and it's just a really solid option for something like that. You can find this at Fort Gale, the Lion Guardian there. You'll need to defeat them and you will get the Lion's Claw by defeating them. Ice Spear is next. I haven't forgotten about you intelligence users. Now, this will spin an armament and release cold magic at the target. That does deal frostbite buildup. It is a solid ranged option that's very easy to buff with talismans, spellblade set, something like that. If you want to focus on that, not only for the magic damage, but you've also got the frostbite buildup that it does here. It's a pretty fast animation. The downside to Ice Spear is it can only be put on very limited amount of weapons, that being like your spears, your polearms, twin blades, like only a specific type of weapon you can put this on, but it is a really solid attack because of the amount of damage it does, as well as being able to buff it in various ways. Now, this comes from Lonia of the Lakes. It's dropped by the Night Cavalry boss patrolling near the Broken Gate Bridge here. You will need to obviously rest until night and then defeat the boss and you'll get the Ice Spear. Double Slash is our last one today. Now, if you like Rivers of Blood and it has been nerfed into the ground, you can make your own Rivers of Blood at home with Double Slash. Now, Double Slash is essentially the exact same animation as Rivers of Blood. It just doesn't have that like blood effect on it. You can add that yourself though, with whether that be greases or any of those armament incantations and spells. You can buff on that as well. Obviously, for the most part, if you're putting this on a weapon, you can get blood loss build up on that anyway pretty easily. It's a very fantastic dexterity build, Ash of War, because of the fast attacks that it does and the various ways you can obviously buff it. And it's just a fantastic animation if you are, you know, a Rivers of Blood enthusiast, right? Like I think a lot of people are, and now that it's, you know, no longer as broken as it was, you can essentially make your own by whacking this on a Nagakiba and having your own success there. In Celia, Town of Sorcery, you can get this via a teardrop scarab that is atop the town on the root system up there. You will need to defeat them. You can't get close to them. You'll need to hit them with a ranged attack and you'll be able to grab the Ash of War from them. But let me know what Ash of Wars I've missed in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza and I hope you have a great day.